Greetings. Our assignment today is to look at diversity and equality, defining the challenges that we're facing. The first thing that I found interesting was that we have been looking at all of this information in a historical perspective. So we have had the opportunity and the luxury to look back on things that people before us have done, and it's very, very easy, in my opinion, to criticize the things that were done in the past in regards to educational policy. However, when we are asked to look at what we are currently doing and maybe even think about policies that we have not yet implemented that would be appropriate, it's a little bit harder to evaluate that. So after reading the information from Wilson and Kozol, I would have to say that I definitely agree with the information that they are presenting. It does, spark an interest with me. As for why I don't think that we have any policies to date in regards to this issue, is basically that it's an enormous issue. I don't think that only education or only economic policy, or only our social systems and how we handle welfare, I don't think there's one single answer. I think it's going to take a huge systems change that at this point we're simply not ready for. I just want to go through a little bit of the information that I was able to read from Wilson and Kozol. Wilson, I was able to read a little bit of information from his When Work Disappears, and he brings up some excellent points. The fact that individuals, when they have work, do not face as much issues of poverty and certainly not as many issues of violence. I thought it was interesting, one of the facts he stated was that in 1950 in certain neighborhoods in Chicago, nearly 70% of all males 14 and over held a job. However, in 1990, in the same neighborhoods, only 37% of males 16 and over were working in a typical week. And obviously that's an effect of many jobs being moved overseas, many jobs becoming phased out because technology has replaced a lot of those. We don't have as much unskilled labor available to those individuals as we used to. But what I found really interesting, not having as much information about what an inner city would be like, since I come from the Midwest and currently live in the Midwest, I thought this fact was interesting. He said by the time white males and black males reached the late 20s, the violent crime ratio is 4-to-1. So 4 blacks would experience violent crime to 1 Caucasian individual experiencing that. However, when it was controlled for employment, there was absolutely no significant difference in violent crime rate. So that just continues to, reiterate the fact that individuals who do not have that work have all these other issues that they're facing. They're dealing with violent crime, they're dealing with poverty, they're dealing with so many other issues. Wilson also sort of addressed the school system and discussed that we might question why these students aren't studying, and he advocated that these students don't necessarily see a connection between how great they're doing in school or even graduation equating into a good job because they've not seen that happen. So they really have no trust or no models for that. Kozol, on the other hand, had a lot of arguments about economy and basically the money issue and how that looks different in different neighborhoods. Because of what he stated in his information, I went back and actually looked at some legislation that he touched on. He said he was able to actually tour the Camden schools and was kind of taken aback at how horrible the students in Camden and many other surrounding inner city schools were. And then what was really terrifying is to learn about what Cherry Hill was, which was the more affluent suburban neighborhood, which was right next door, who had all of these 4 gyms, tennis courts, a dance room, 2 rec fields, and 13 full-time physical ed teachers, to name just a few things. So there's obviously a difference in what those two groups of students were getting in terms of an education. So this sparked a huge case, which was Abbott versus Burke. And so Abbott was just the student name that was used, but there were 20 students represented. And in looking at this case, it's fascinating. There were actually, in July of 1985 was when the original case was filed, and it started with just a couple school systems, and now it's expanded to, I want to say, 31 school districts, including the Camden School District. So between July of 1985, when the case was originally filed, and May of 2011, there were 21 rulings related to Abbott versus Burke. And as you read through these rulings, it's interesting because essentially the state of New Jersey was told that the way that they are distributing funds is not appropriate. It is not fair to those individuals who are not getting funding and who are suffering in their education as a result of a lack of funds. But essentially, all of these different rulings were related to New Jersey, the state of New Jersey, and their education department, their inability to meet the requirements of the very first original legislation that was ruled upon. So essentially, it took the state of New Jersey 26 years to fully create a more equal system of distribution of education funds. So not only you have to think about the people in that state, I guess, and what their perceptions are then of the way that that particular state is treating those individuals who are living, in an inner city or a more poor neighborhood. And then nationally, we have to understand there's clearly a problem if it's taking 26 years for us to become compliant in one single state related to this issue. And then on a closing note, I guess I wanted to note that, while I don't anticipate working in an inner city or don't have experience working in an inner city, I really relate all the information that I was reading to experiences that I have in very rural Midwest Nebraska, because there are a lot of cases that we see that deal with poverty and some inequality in funding as well. I've had parents that come to me and tell me that they cannot teach their child to tie their shoes, or they can't help their child with their homework, and essentially they're asking for help, which I can imagine is something that's very difficult for them in the first place. So we obviously have to understand that students are coming from those different areas. In looking more at Obama's Race to the Top legislation, I'd never really studied it that closely, so I appreciated the opportunity to do that for this class. It was kind of fascinating how the different arguments that Wilson and Kozol had are essentially outlined in the legislation that Obama used in Race to the Top. So he hits on a lot of those different things, like adoption of standards, which is something Wilson really advocated for, using data to measure student growth and success and help individuals make educated decisions, regarding students' progress. And then teacher standards are also approached. So these are issues that are upcoming, and I guess it will just take time. Those of us in the education field who haven't even been there very long, such as myself, can already recognize that we seem to get a lot of legislation, we have a lot of changes, so it's very hard for us to jump on board and trust something that's going on, and really to pour our hearts into it, knowing that in 4 years it may change to something completely different. We see a lot of hype. So I think that if this legislation can get past just being hype and being fad, and can become more of a trend and something that is stuck to for a long period of time, that we might actually see some changes. But obviously I think there's more policies as well in terms of economic issues that would need to be passed before we could ever begin to touch the issue that's going on. I appreciate you listening. Thanks so much.